25 years ago, the state legislature passed an education reform bill. The goal was to use state money for bridging the gap in achievement, reflecting other gaps, whether by race or income or school district. Years later, legislators decided there was a need to increase the funding and change the formula, but they failed to reach agreement in time for this year's budget. That's why 15 groups around the state decided to push harder by forming the Massachusetts Education Equity Partnership. Our guest is from one of the member groups, Latinos for Education. We'd like to welcome its founder and CEO, Amanda Fernandez. Thank you very much for being with us, Amanda.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Amanda, talk about the gaps that I guess you're most concerned with for Latino students in Massachusetts.
Yes, so I think the information in the report, which talked about disparities in education, should be of no surprise. While we've had a situation where we've had good successes in Massachusetts related to educational outcomes for kids, what we do continue to see is continued disparities in educational opportunity for Latino children and Black students as well as low-income students. Some of the more stark data that I think is important to know, for example, Massachusetts ranks number 43 as it relates to college graduation rates for Latino students. That's one important indicator. There are a number in the report, but that's one in particular to highlight.
And of course, this begins with access to early education. How does that look right now in terms of the gaps or how many kids might still be on waiting lines for that?
Well, what we do know for Latino children is that not enough access early education in our public school systems in Massachusetts and the country, for that matter.
Another factor here is the state formula for education funding, because to some degree, I guess in the past, they looked at student need, if a lot of them were low income, for example, and I guess we stopped doing that in Massachusetts.
Well, I would say that we have a great opportunity now with the continued spotlight on educational opportunity and gaps for Black, Latino, and low-income children to ensure that we are supplying adequate resources to the most needy students in our state.
Of course, besides the resources, you have gaps that turn up in suspension rates. What about those?
So we do know that suspension rates are at higher levels for Black and Latino youth and young people. And we can certainly put a spotlight on that and make sure that we are not only looking at suspension rates, but what are the types of supports that we are offering to our students so that we can decrease that number and have more children on a path to college graduation and opportunities.
What about resources for language learners? Do we have enough of those now?
So at this point, we have resources that support English language learners. The recent Look Act, which was passed, is an opportunity for school districts to look at ways in which they can continue to expand and have more opportunity to determine what types of English language learner supports there should be. With that said, English language learners do languish the most in our schools. And so I would like to say that we need to put additional spotlight on how we support English language learners in our state.
Of course, another gap concerns students with learning disabilities, and they tend to get more suspensions than other students too. What about those students?
So we know that children with special needs, as well as English language learners, do have the lowest performance in our schools. So I think that's simply an indicator that we need to pay particular attention to our most vulnerable children, which happen to be those with special needs and English language learners.
Of course, the other thing is how do you get the legislature to deliver this time? Because we're not going to get the millionaires tax. They had a hard time reaching agreement before. How do you see these groups in your coalition changing that?
Well, so I think what's important to highlight about the groups that participated and gave input into the data and the report is that we are all organizations that are already and have been doing work to contribute to closing opportunity gaps for our students. Our organization, Latinos for Education, for example, focuses on the pipeline of Latino leadership in the sector because we believe it's important for our children to be what they can see. We know role models matter, and we want to see more of our teachers and leaders reflect the students that we serve. And we know in Boston, over 40% of our student population is Latino.
Do you see a role in your campaign for parents?
There will always be a role for parents. Parents are our customers in education. Parents are a critical voice in ensuring that they're heard and that they contribute to how we close achievement gaps and opportunity gaps for our students.
Well, there will be an opportunity for some community engagement pretty soon because you're planning some forums on education.
We are indeed. So in response to what we already knew about opportunity gaps in the state, we are partnering with Boston Public Schools, with the Department of Education, and two other Latino organizations, Amplify Latinx and the Greater Boston Latino Network, to host Latino Education Town Hall. Our first one is October 1st, this coming Monday. At 6:30, we invite the Latino community and the community at large that is interested in Latino education to come to the bowling center to have their voice heard. And that will be an opportunity for our commissioner, Jeff Riley, to be at the forefront of hearing Latino community voices and input into how we proceed as a state in closing opportunity gaps.
We should mention if people want to see the report and if they want some more information about what's coming up with your campaign, you've got a website they can go to?
So Latinos for Education has a website. It's www, of course, latinos4education.org.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.
Amanda Fernandez from Latinos for Education. We'll have more news in just a moment.